The question I'm asked most is how I know where to place the shadows. To show you how, I'm using just 2 colours to turn this into a moody late night scene, while talking you through what stays in the light, what falls into shadow, and where I bend the rules. I'm using the glow from the open fridge to backlight everything, so I'm blocking in the shadow colour first, then painting the light on top. Our little guy is sitting side on to the fridge, so the divide between light and shadow runs roughly down the middle of his head, following its shape. That divide is called the line of termination, or the terminator, which feels a bit much. The ear just needs a thin strip of light, leaving the underside in shadow, and on the horns I'm again following their curvature, while thinking about where the light is able to reach. These are form shadows, caused by the surface turning away from the light. Cast shadows are different, and happen when something blocks light from reaching another surface, like this one cast by his tuft of hair onto the base of his horn. They're separate shadows, but here they merge into one shape. When something casts a shadow onto a surface it's touching, like where his mouth meets his snack, the cast shadow starts exactly where the form shadow ends. It just changes direction and travels away from the light. These fingers fall into shadow around the rounded fingertips, and you'll notice that if something looks off at first, I'll nudge it around until it looks, or at least feels, right. That freedom is the main reason I like to plan pages digitally first. You definitely don't need to, but testing different placements and making quick adjustments is a great way to build that intuition. If you do work on an iPad though, I'd recommend a textured screen protector. I use one from Paperlike, and it gives the screen a nice papery feel and stops the Apple Pencil sliding around, so I get a lot more control. This isn't sponsored, but I've left an affiliate link in the description, and using it basically buys me a coffee. Or if you hate me, like Billy clearly does, just go directly to Paperlike. To make the neckline look like it's actually sitting on top of the skin, I'm offsetting the terminator as it crosses onto the fabric. Then to reinforce that change in depth, I add a thin cast shadow along the inside edge. These tiny details are easy to miss, but they often do more to sell the illusion than the larger, more obvious shadows. The main idea to mapping form shadows is to imagine the flat shapes as 3-dimensional forms, then ask where each surface turns away from the light. Around the ankle, for example, the surface curves tightly, so the band of light stays narrow. Across the flatter top of the foot, though, it spreads wider. Around his toes, I'm letting the light wrap around each one, then I'm just adding a small cast shadow from the trouser leg. Or pants leg, if you're American. Looking back, I should have pushed it slightly lower, given the height of the light source, but it does the job, and I've made peace with it. For areas that are mostly in shadow, I find it easier to fill the whole area with my shadow colour first, then paint the light back in, which sounds backwards, but it just feels correct. If an area is mostly lit, I do the opposite, and paint in the shadows instead. Either way, I'm really just finding the boundary between light and shadow, just like you would with a pencil on paper, but choosing whether to add the light or the shadow makes it easier for my little brain to see where that boundary should go. I'm giving each of these a thin crescent of light, following their slightly wonky shapes to keep each one distinct. I designed them like this purely to make the most of that fridgy backlit glow, but still can't work out what they're supposed to be. Gluten-free brake pads, maybe, I don't know. If you've got any better ideas, let me know. I've done all I can. I'm mapping the plate's shadow loosely by eye, using its shape as a guide, which works well enough for something simple, but becomes less reliable as things get more complex. So next, I'll show you a precise way to map cast shadows. Even if you never use it yourself, seeing why they take the shapes they do makes them much easier to eyeball. My shadow mapping course covers the full method and the wider principles behind light logic. It goes deeper than I can here, partly because some things are just easier to explain when I'm not racing a retention graph. So the link's in the description. For now though, here's how it works for cylindrical objects, like this can. First we find the point on the ground directly beneath the light source, very imaginatively called the ground point. Then I add a few vertical guides along the shadow side of the cylinder. Boxier forms like cubes don't need them because their corners are used instead. From the ground point, I draw lines through the bottom of each guide and across the floor. Then lines from the light source through the top of each guide. Where each matching pair meets gives me an outer point of the shadow, which I connect with a curved line to complete the shape. For a quicker, slightly looser version, use the cylinder's bottom plane as a template for the curved end of the shadow. Same shape, just larger when the light source is nearby. And if the light source sits outside the frame, you can still use the line method by extending them from the object itself. For the can, because it's small and directly in front of the fridge, I can just use its two outer edges without adding any extra guides. And since I'm treating the fridge as a broad light source, I'm using a point roughly in the middle to set the direction lines. Then I just connect the 2 points, copying the curve of the can's bottom edge. I'm also adding a thin strip of light along the sides of the can, known as rim lighting. Behave yourselves. You'll usually see rim lighting on curved surfaces when they're backlit. In reality, it would be a bit subtler than this, but subtlety isn't really what we're going for here. When I originally made this design, the hardest part was keeping the lighting believable without losing the strong graphic shapes I wanted. For most of the scene, I treated the fridge as a giant light box, throwing light out in every direction, but once you move inside the fridge, that idea stops working. So I had to decide where the light was actually coming from. Lighting each shelf from the upper left turned out to be the best compromise between believable and readable. Realistically, that should also cast shadows onto the right interior wall, but they cluttered the fridge, and even worse, they made it obvious that the fridge was running on its own light logic, so they had to go too. By this point, I was just making up the rules and hoping no one noticed. I'm slightly obsessive about lighting behaving logically, so I'd be lying if I said the fridge didn't cause a minor internal crisis, but sometimes the strongest result comes from knowing where to bend the rules without breaking the overall illusion. And thankfully, only one person pointed it out in the comments, so I blocked him. There's no suggestion in the drawing itself that the countertop overhangs, but by shifting the fridge's shadow to the right as it crosses onto the cabinet, your eye immediately reads the cabinet as sitting further back. That same vertical shadow also falls onto the left side of the bowls, but bends with their curvature. Then on the opposite side, the bowls turn away from the light and fall into form shadow, leaving a tapered strip of light through the middle, which is angled to match the tilt of each bowl. The kettle just needs a thin strip of light across each of its individual forms, and a small ring of light to imply the rim of the spout. Part of the magic of this style comes from not just colouring what's drawn, but colouring as if it already exists in 3 dimensions. Lastly, I'm stretching the shapes of his horns and hair to build the shadow on the cabinet behind him. With this light direction, those shadows would realistically overlap into one unreadable blob, but by spacing them out to echo his silhouette, it reads more clearly and adds a bit of drama. It's also much easier to map this way, but that's purely by coincidence. I've staggered this shadow the same way as before. By offsetting it at each change in depth, your eye just accepts it as space. Anyway, I hope this has been useful, mildly enjoyable, if nothing else. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Say bye, Billy. Say bye. Ah, good boy. He's a good boy.